good evening, good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from on Earth or in outer space. Welcome to episode 123 of the Be Yourself and Love It podcast with me, Antony Sammeroff. I am here with the preeminent Dr. Stephanie Seneff. She was or is a senior researcher at MIT. She's done so much amazing work bringing to people's awareness the risks of environmental toxicity. We're going to she wrote an amazing book called Toxic Legacy, which you should all get from wherever you get books from these days. And we're going to have a little bit of a jam and talk about toxicity, old, new, contemporary, and the legacy, I suppose, of toxicity in the past. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me in the Be Yourself and Love It podcast.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we got to get together in quite a nice way because I am such a I feel like you kind of like hacked down so much jungle before me. I wanted to send you a copy of my book, which you kindly actually read, which is really nice of you, and you had some nice words to say about that. I thought, must have you on the show. So for those who don't know you, it would be good to have a little bit of like a biographical sketch of Dr. Stephanie Seneff, and how did you get to being the notorious figure despite your incredible pedigree as a scientist? It doesn't stop them from people in glass houses throwing stones at us these days. So tell us all a little bit about your story.
Okay, it is quite interesting and certainly a dramatic turn around 2007. My education is all at in fact, my education and my career are all always at MIT. I'm an MIT born and bred person. I started as a freshman and got my bachelor's in biology with a minor in food and nutrition, actually, which kind of served me well later. I have a MS, EE, and PhD degrees in electrical engineering and computer science, all from MIT. And then I've worked at MIT all my life. So after I graduated. And I'm now a senior research scientist, which is the highest level on the research staff, equivalent to a full professor on the teaching staff. So I've loved MIT. It's been very good to me. But most of my career was spent developing I wrote a lot of computer code, developing systems that could allow computers to communicate with humans using natural language, precursors to Amazon Echo and the Siri platform. So that technology became commoditized really about the time that I decided I needed to get out, because my computer code wasn't going to compete with all the people who were developing systems that they were selling. And so I didn't think I could keep up. So I actually had a kind of a crisis around 2005, 2006, wondering how I was going to finish out my career. And at the same time, I was watching the autism rates go up every year. And I'm like, this can't be just nothing, Right. Oh, we're just diagnosing it more. Don't worry about it. I didn't think that was true at all. I felt like there has to be something, in the environment that's causing that. And simultaneously with that, my husband got diagnosed with heart disease and was put on a statin drug. And I hated the statin drug right away, and I wanted him off. And so that became a battle as well. And so the combination of looking at the statin drugs and looking at autism, I kind of converged on cholesterol actually for quite a while. Really interesting molecule that actually is essential for brain health and also I think essential for heart health. So that's a whole story with the statin drugs. Anyway, 2007, I decided to start looking for autism, toxic exposures that the autistic kids might be causing the autism.
And sorry, how did you negotiate with this with the university that you were working for, this change in direction? You said, hey, I want to look into this toxicity thing. How did that conversation go down?
It actually was really easy. I was delighted with how it worked out. I had been working, I've actually gotten my funding from a computer company in Taiwan for over a decade now, or for maybe even close to 2 decades. I've been getting funding from this company in Taiwan. And originally they were funding my research on building conversational interactions with the computer involving language learning. So I was working on having English-speaking people learn to speak Chinese through dialogue games. So I loved that. And I had a bunch of students that I supervised doing that work. And I thought it was important too, because I think Americans need to learn Chinese. We have a very pathetic ability to speak Chinese, and China's going to matter in our future. So we need to be able to communicate with the Chinese. So that's what I was doing. And then basically, when I got interested in the autism situation, I really wanted to track that down. I got the idea of pitching that to Quanta. And at the same time, Quanta was getting interested in sort of the medical domain. So it kind of made sense that I could grab onto that to look at toxic chemical exposures and their relationship to disease. So I pitched that in the next round, and they accepted it. And then they've been funding that ever since. They have been
Awesome.
they've really been so supportive. It's been great. And so that's how I keep going. And for as long as I can get funding from Quanta, I will keep on doing this work. So.
And what does your research involve doing day to day? What data do you collect? How do you collect it? How do you process it? What's a
Right.
day
So,
in the life of Dr. Seneff?
well, for many years, I was actually gathering data from the web and looking at statistical correlations, between different chemicals and disease. That's how I was looking for autism. I looked at a number of different things, trying to find correlations with autism. And I know how to do that sort of thing. So to produce these plots, most of my plots are over time, patterns over time of increased risk, increased prevalence of certain diseases, and looking for the correlation with toxic exposures.
Now, a little birdie told me the more times that an MD hands you a lollipop when you're a small child after a medical intervention, the higher your chance of contracting autism later in life is. Could you comment on that wild conspiracy theory that's been gaining ground on the internet? Have you got any
That's
opinions on that?
Yeah, I certainly do, and that's certainly where I started with the autism. I had a very strong suspicion that the lollipops were playing a role in autism. I still think that's true. And actually, what I have found, and this is part of what I suggested to Zen Honeycutt, who's a founder of Moms Across America, I told her that I thought the lollipops might be contaminated with glyphosate. Because for the live viruses, they're grown on a culture that probably contains glyphosate, given where it's sourced. And so she actually tested the lollipops for glyphosate, and she
Whoa.
found it pretty much in all the all the lollipops that were live virus
Right.
produced.
So let me get this straight. Glyphosate is it admitted to be toxic to a human being, or is it controversial, the idea that it's toxic to us? Where does the official line on this issue stand at the moment?
Yeah, well, that's a good question too. And in fact, when you look back on the history, you realize that glyphosate was not properly tested. They did a lot of shenanigans to get it past the review process way back in the 1970s. It was first introduced on the market, I think, in 1974, 1975, to control weeds.
Weeds.
Yeah, it's an herbicide, and it was declared to be a wonderful herbicide because it basically kills all plants except for those that
Right.
have been engineered to resist it through microbial genes.
Amazing.
It kills
Well,
them
first
all.
of all, it's amazing that they can engineer plants to be resistant to something that kills plants, and bravo to scientists for being able to do that on one hand. On the other hand, um, so wait a second, is it just toxic to plants, and what about little flies and creatures that might land on those plants that have been sprayed with it? How does it affect wildlife?
It affects everything
Okay,
it touches, including humans, of course. And our
right.
gut microbiome is very sensitive to glyphosate, and
Right.
that's why we have an epidemic in gut dysbiosis and all kinds of gut diseases, inflammatory bowel disease and cancer, colon cancer, and celiac disease. All of these diseases, I think, are direct hit. Glyphosate is a primary causal factor in all of them, in my opinion.
Right. So if the stuff now, it's really, really amazing that we can get to the 21st century and people can go out and literally put poison on your food and then sell it to you in the supermarket. As you know, I've been putting the pharmaceutical industry under the microscope and the healthcare system at large under a magnifying glass over the last couple of years. And what I had to say was, see if the health insurance market in the US worked the way that it ought to. What the private insurers would do is they'd get together and form a big conglomerate to sue Monsanto, Roundup, all of the companies that are spraying glyphosate, because they'd say, look, you guys are causing disease, and then we need to pay out left and right for insurance claims to treat the patients that you're creating with your poisonous toxins. That's, of course, not the world that we live in. And probably if people did, I hate to speculate, but I imagine if you looked under the hood, you might find a lot of the money that's going that owns private medical insurance, probably a lot of the same conglomerates that own the companies that are selling glyphosate. So we don't have, but it's amazing that you can't even go into the supermarket and buy what you think is food without the risk of poisoning yourself. And no one seems to notice, no one seems to care. It's just on this tiny corner of the internet that we inhabit that we're like watching haplessly as Ted Bundy rolls the bus that we are in the passenger seat of off a cliff slowly. And no one goes, get off the bus, get off the bus. It's Ted Bundy driving. He's a maniac. How did we get into this position?
It is shocking, isn't it? And I actually took me a long time to finally decide that it was true. First of all, the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry and the agrochemical industry are the same thing. You know,
Right.
The companies that own the agrochemicals are also producing pharmaceuticals. And in some cases, they actually produce a toxic chemical that causes a disease that they then produce a drug to treat.
Oh, wow.
So that is so clear. You know, it's like, I think they know what they're doing. It's not just accidental that they happen to have those two industries under their thumb, because they can just make you as sick as they want to make you with the toxic chemicals, and then they can just pour all these drugs out and get filthy rich on your agony because you're so sick. It's a great system for making money, and they've done a terrific job of it. I mean, they're very wealthy. The pharmaceutical industry, you know, is the biggest lobby group in the United States. They really control what the government is willing to legislate by virtue of just stuffing their pockets with money. It is really pretty despicable, I think, the situation we're in right now.
Well, if you're saying that people are doing this, knowing what they're doing, what you're talking about is willful evil. In other words, the willingness to do harm to others for personal gain, despite the fact that you're profiting from doing harm. Like I'm all for capitalism, I'm all for the voluntary exchange of goods and services, but that's on the basis that, you know, I go out and buy a product that the creator of is seeking to improve my standard of living by selling me something that I'm going to benefit from, and in return, I'm willing to improve their standard of living by remunerating them. That's what I understood capitalism to be. Maybe I'm extremely naive in thinking that, and I need to go right back to Adam Smith. But I thought that's what we were meant to, how we were meant to be running an economy based on voluntary exchange for mutual benefit.
Exactly. I mean, that's certainly how I see it too, and I can't understand that kind of uncontrolled evil that's going on in the world right now. I believe it's evil. There's no other way to describe it. They can't be so naive that they're not noticing that glyphosate's causing all these diseases, that they can then cause them to sell all these pharmaceuticals to treat them. You know, it can't be something they don't know, I feel.
And who's willing to do the I mean, you said you were taking data from online, so does that mean that you rely on other people having studied this stuff?
Yeah, I actually don't collect data,
Mhm.
remarkably. I very rarely have I actually collected data, aside from just getting data that has already been
Mhm.
prepared by somebody else, and then looking at it statistically, looking at patterns over time, or patterns in space as well.
So who's studying this stuff and why is it being ignored?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with glyphosate is that the industry managed to convince the regulators early on that this is a fantastic chemical because it doesn't harm humans. You know, they convinced them of that, and they're very reluctant to think otherwise at this point. And of course, our government, the United States government, heavily subsidizes these massive farms that rely on toxic chemicals to do their work, so they don't have to hire lots and lots of people. So the number of people in farming in this country has gone way down because of
Right.
this efficient food
Right.
production.
Yeah, so they're basically forcing people at gunpoint through the tax system to poison themselves.
Yes, exactly. They're using the taxes to subsidize the farms that are poisoning us. And then the small family farmers getting choked out. It's just sad how many fewer small family farms we have today than we did, 50 years ago. It's just really sad because those are the farms that produce the healthy food. And that's what we need. We need to have a lot of people go back into farming with small farms that are organic, certified organic and regenerative. I think the regenerative farming movement can reverse climate change. It can really help to reverse climate change.
Yeah, I had an amazing person working in the regenerative farming industry from an organization called Gaiazyme on the show, and all of these things work together. We spray things on the crops that kill the microorganisms in the soil. The microorganisms are necessary to pre-digest the minerals in the soil so that the plant can take them. You might not be able to metabolize ground up seashells, but some bacteria can. And then the plants can metabolize the bacteria, and then you can metabolize the plants, and then you've got minerals. So we're suffering from these mineral deficiencies, which means we can't fight off all the poisons that are coming into our system the way, some of I know that I couldn't eat the way that my dad eats. I've got exactly the kind of gut stuff going on that you've taken an interest on in your career. I used to be completely intolerant of lactose and wheat products, but through, fasting, juice cleanse, and various naturopathic protocols, I can actually tolerate those foods now. So I kind of cured myself. But most people are really not willing to go to the kind of extremes that I went. And what's more, they don't know. But so if the glyphosate isn't cytotoxic enough to kill your cells, it will kill the microorganisms that live in the that you depend upon to digest your food. And then again, you're not getting the absorption you need to take the nutritional elements out of your food to run a healthy body that can then eject the toxins through the detoxification pathways, the nose, the mouth, the skin, the back passage, the urine, etc. Do you know about the pathways that these the ways that these chemicals, like, because we get this, we hear this term going around, leaky gut. Could you tell us a little bit about that, what it means? Is it a real disease? My doctor says, oh, that's just a myth on the internet, and whatnot. Can you tell us
I know
about...
it's funny that the mainstream doesn't want to admit that leaky gut exists as a disease, which is so ridiculous, I think. There are peer-reviewed papers that have shown that glyphosate causes leaky gut. I have no doubt that it's a major factor in that problem. And I even understand how it happens. And it's really quite fascinating. And it has to do with the gut microbes in a big way. And you mentioned lactose intolerance and gluten intolerance, lactose intolerance, gluten intolerance are directly, I think glyphosate's a major cause of this complete, ridiculous epidemic that we have now in people who don't eat wheat. It's just amazing. Don't eat gluten. Now you have to, if you have people over for dinner, you have to ask everybody, what are your food sensitivities? Because there's so many people who have so many problems with so many foods. And I think glyphosate is a major player. It's not the only thing that's causing these problems, but I think it is maybe primary for that issue.
And people could digest these foods for centuries, thousands of years. And I accept, the wheat that we grow is different. It's got more gluten in it and things like that, but for so long, the French and Italians were doing perfectly fine eating all that wheat. So something strange is going on.
Well, the wheat is sprayed with glyphosate right before harvest. It's sort of a no-brainer to think that, in fact, they've shown that glyphosate is in the cookies and the crackers and the it's Cheerios, is oats, that's sprayed with right before harvest. So all these crops that are sprayed as a drying agent, not to kill the weeds, as a drying agent, those are the ones that end up with higher levels of glyphosate in many cases, and they're not GMO. So when you see non-GMO, that's not good enough as a label to keep away from the glyphosate.
Could you explain what you mean by a drying agent?
Yeah, well, the wheat, as I understand it, they have found that it's quite convenient to spray the crop right shortly before harvest, to spray it as a drying agent. It basically causes the crop to go to seed, so it synchronizes the yield. in the north, you're racing against the clock because it can get too cold. And so you need to harvest the crop before the frost. And you can harvest it earlier if you can get glyphosate to encourage it to go to seed, because it's being exposed to the glyphosate. So the glyphosate kills the crop, but you grab the seed sort of right at the end, just before it dies. And then it's easier to clear the crop too for next year's. You get a head start on the weeds. You've already applied glyphosate to kill the weeds. And then you get a head start on clearing the field and getting ready for next year's planting.
So you mentioned that you understand how leaky gut works, and how that comes about, and that it's fascinating. Maybe you'll fascinate us.
Okay, let me see if I can tell it to you that doesn't get too complicated. I actually maybe I should introduce deuterium at this point, because it's a central player. It's so interesting. Deuterium is something that I came upon. I knew about deuterium because I know science as heavy hydrogen. It's an extra neutron in the hydrogen. Hydrogen is the smallest atom. It has one electron and one proton, really tiny thing. And there's lots and lots of hydrogen. Of course, our body has far more hydrogen than any other atom in our body. And it's the basis of all these chemical reactions that take place in the body. All metabolism totally depends on hydrogen. Deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. It's a natural isotope. It's present everywhere in the seawater at 156 parts per million. So it sounds like a small amount, but it actually is a lot compared to things like the minerals. Like there's 5 times as much deuterium in the blood as there is calcium, just to get a perspective. So although it's small relative to hydrogen, it's still big relative to the other essential nutrients that we have. And deuterium has a very nasty effect on the mitochondria. So the mitochondria depend upon what's called the hydrogen motive force to generate ATP. And ATP is the energy currency of the cell. So very, very important for the mitochondria to be healthy and for them to be able to generate lots of ATP and to not generate lots of reactive oxygen species, which can damage the cell. So the mitochondria, I think of putting deuterium in the mitochondria like putting sugar in the gas tank. Basically ruins the engine. It ruins the engine, and then the mitochondria break. Those pumps break. And then the mitochondria start spewing out all this reactive oxygen, and it causes DNA damage, and you just go south. I mean, it's really a big problem. Mitochondrial dysfunction is a huge component of most of the modern diseases. They're all associated with problems with the mitochondria. And I think the deuterium toxicity is a major aspect that's causing that. And that glyphosate is causing the deuterium toxicity because it disrupts the mechanisms by which the body manages deuterium. And that is a very big and fascinating and complicated story. But I'll give you a short story, a shorter story, a piece of the puzzle, which is really fascinating, which is that the gut, that you build up a lot of gas in the gut. The microbes make a lot of gas. They make hydrogen gas, they make methane gas, they make hydrogen sulfide gas. Those are all sort of being produced by the microbes. But the microbes can also take those gases and turn them back into organic matter. And they do that. They have a complete cycle that they're doing, making gases, pulling them back, and making organic matter from those gases. And the reason why they do that, I believe, is to deplete the deuterium. It's a whole fractionation process that ends up producing new nutrients that are severely depleted in deuterium. And then they feed that to the colonocytes lining the gut. So it's a really amazing system where the microbes produce the hydrogen gas, use the hydrogen gas as a reducing agent to reduce carbon dioxide and to make acetate. And then acetate is pure gold because it's a very low, if it's made this way, it's very unlikely to have any deuterium in it. And then they use the acetate to make these short chain fatty acids. And butyrate in particular comes from the acetate, comes from the hydrogen gas. Butyrate is a low deuterium nutrient that the colonocytes love. That's their favorite food. And the microbes make it for them. And then you have a deficiency in butyrate in association with glyphosate. And this is because glyphosate actually causes the pH of the gut to go up. And the acetogenic bacteria are acid loving. So they don't do well when there's not enough acid, when it's too basic in the gut. Glyphosate raises the pH, which causes the acetobacter to shrink in numbers, which causes less acetate to be made, which causes less butyrate to be made. And then you have a butyrate deficiency problem. And then you have sick colonocytes, and then you get leaky gut. So that's kind of the short story of how I think it's working.
Wow, amazing. And what happens when you have leaky gut?
Well, now things can get across the gut barrier that should have stayed inside, including the bacteria. Of course, the bacteria can infiltrate into the lining of the gut. And then in fact, pathogens can infiltrate in there, and then they cause inflammation because the immune cells come in trying to keep the pathogens under control. the beneficial bacteria are being killed off preferentially by the glyphosate, which gives a chance for the pathogens to grow. And then the pathogens are producing toxic metabolites that are causing all kinds of problems. And the immune cells are causing inflammation. So now you get inflammatory bowel disease, and eventually you get cancer. I mean, that down the road is cancer, because those colonocytes are very unhealthy, as they're not getting enough butyrates. They're getting too much deuterium in the mitochondria, and then they're unable to maintain a healthy barrier because they can't make enough of the sulfomucins, which are really important for keeping the gut barrier healthy.
So that invites the question: what do you think cancer is?
I think cancer is actually a response to deuterium toxicity. This is something I'm really keen on right now, and I've been writing furiously, actually trying to put together stories, trying to get papers published on the idea that cancer is a response to deuterium toxicity in the mitochondria, that many cases of cancer are due to that, excess deuterium in the mitochondria.
How's your research typically received when you do publish papers?
That's an excellent question. I'm having a lot of trouble. I have to confess that as you know, I'm sort of persona non grata, I think, to the pharmaceutical industry and all the things that I've stood up against, including glyphosate, because glyphosate is a big moneymaker. And the glyphosate industry doesn't like me, of course, because I'm saying all these things, and they want to believe that glyphosate's safe. They want everyone to believe glyphosate's safe. So they don't like what I'm saying about glyphosate. And of course, I've also spoken out on the lollipops, as you know, and the statin drugs. I mean, the statin drugs are a big moneymaker, and I came down hard on the statin drugs in the first back in the 2010 timeframe.
Does your research impact reach other researchers that kind of carry on what you're doing, or have activist tendencies?
Well, I actually have a network of really smart people that I work with all the time, and we're having a ball. I mean, actually, the research is wonderful, and we're having so much fun sharing ideas and trying to figure things out. But all of us are kind of keen to understand what's causing cancer, and how is glyphosate toxic, and the lollipops. What's going on with those, and we're all very keen to figure it out. And they're very smart people, and many of them have expertise in areas where I'm not so strong. So I appreciate their knowledge, and it's been a field day. I mean, I'm having a ball, to be honest with you. I really love the work, but the frustration is
enjoying it so much.
The frustration is that the mainstream just basically makes it extremely hard to publish. That is certainly true.
Right. I see. So the best thing they can do is ignore you, not let you publish, because if they the more they acknowledge you, the more people start to smell a rat. So there is so much in what you were saying that I want to pick up upon. Do you know anything about Brown's gas?
What is it called?
Brown's gas.
Brown.
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 Yeah.
Like black. Brown's gas.
Like the Brown was the name of the scientist who popularized it as oxyhydrogen, like O2 plus H2. The reason why I ask is when you started talking about the role of hydrogen in the gut, it made so much sense. Of one of my teachers, and he's been on the show twice, George Wiseman. He started working with Brown's gas in engineering and ended up finding that you can breathe this stuff. Now, people have treated all sorts, like George Wiseman himself. He used to have psoriasis all over his arms, and he looks 10 years younger now than he looked 10 years ago. And his second wife died of lupus. He later found out, long after that, he started using Brown's gas medicinally, if we're allowed to say that people started a couple of people wrote to him and said they used it to treat lupus. Now, I'll send you the relevant
So do you know what Brown's gas is?
Yeah, it's basic. It's also known as oxyhydrogen, or O2 plus H2. you can bubble it through water, and we create what we
Okay,
call
so it's sort of water which has gases in it that are oxygen and hydrogen, right?
yeah, exactly.
Oh,
So
that's interesting.
you can dissolve it into water, and then we call it hydrogen enriched water, or you can actually breathe it directly, although it needs to be quite a small stream because obviously it's very flammable, so it would present a fire hazard. But
It
but
sounds a little scary, but it makes total sense to me. Actually, I'm aware that hydrogen gas itself has become
right.
popular as a therapy. And people sell, these magnesium tablets that can make bubbles, and you drink the water
Yeah.
that has hydrogen gas in it. And that totally makes sense to me because, so what I think is that the deuterium, well, what I know, in fact, is deuterium tends to stay in the more solid state. So when you look at water from ice, and then you have gelled water like Jello, right? And then you have liquid
Mhm.
water, and then you have gas. And whenever you have ice, water that evaporates off of ice is low in deuterium. So
Right.
glacier water becomes healthy because it's a low deuterium
Right.
source of water.
Right.
And then the water that I think the gel that is all over our body, most of the water in our body is gelled water. This is Gerald
Mhm.
Pollack's work.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I think,
Exactly. Easy
and the
water.
easy water. And I think, and I'm almost certain now, I've been fussing around with this idea that easy water traps deuterium. And
Wow.
so
Incredible.
it pushes out protons. Gerald talks about the battery, right? Do you know about the battery? Gerald
Um.
Pollack's battery.
I. Why don't you expound for us? I'm not sure if I'm sure about it or not yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so he has this idea of easy water, which is
Yeah.
exclusion zone water, that's formed by these sort of very hydrophilic materials that have lots of sulfates attached to them. He works with these um, naphion. Naphion is a synthetic big molecule that has a lot of sulfonates attached
Mm.
to the stuff, and it makes really strong gelled water, and it creates a battery, and it pushes protons out into the fluid water that's surrounding it. And so he thinks, and I agree, that the glycocalyx, which lines all the cells, like all the blood vessels have the
Mm.
glycocalyx lining produced by the endothelial cells that make the blood vessels. And the glycocalyx also produces gelled water. And that's the EZ water, it's exclusion zone. So it actually is a way to protect the cell from picking up stuff that's
Yeah.
coming through the blood, that it doesn't
Yeah,
want.
that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, so I'm seeing how things fit together here because we were we found it amazing how the Brown's gas could treat so many diseases, and but when I heard you speak about the role of hydrogen in the gut, I was like, oh, here's part of the puzzle for sure. Why the hydrogen's so helpful, and also the body itself is a battery, and we're getting these extra electrons. It was interesting when you said that the gut should be a little bit more alkaline in order for
Acid, higher acid.
sorry, it should be a little
Yeah,
bit more acid, which
yeah.
yeah, that's what I had meant to say. So because that made me start to think, how do people treat this stuff? Is it beneficial for people to, for example, take a hydrogen chloride supplement with their food to have extra stomach acid to help them break the things down better, or like what sort of
Yeah, you would hope that
are you making?
the stomach would be able to make enough acid on its own, right? A
That's
healthy
right,
stomach should be able to do that. We do have a problem with the stomach not being able to make enough acid. I think it's connected to glyphosate.
right,
Glyphosate actually gets taken up much better in an acidic environment.
right.
It's much more easier for it to get into cells. So when you think of the glyphosate coming in through the stomach, I think it's going to wreck those cells in the stomach that make the acid, and prevent them from making enough acid, which is then not going to digest the food very well.
Hmm.
If there's not enough acid, then the proteins can't get broken down into individual amino acids. And when that doesn't happen, the peptides stay intact and get into the colon undigested, so they don't get absorbed. You're not getting the nutrition out of the proteins that you should
Hmm.
be getting because you can't break them down. And that's how you get celiac disease too, because you have these peptide sequences that are allergenic that stick
Hmm.
around because you didn't manage to digest them. When you get all those peptide sequences stuck in the colon where they shouldn't be, then there are microbes in the colon that can break them down all the way, metabolize them to carbon dioxide and water, basically release nitrogen. That you've lost them as amino acids at that point. And also it creates a basic, it raises the pH because of the ammonia that's produced from the nitrogen in the proteins, in the peptides that were remained undigested. So that is a whole process by which I think glyphosate could be raising the pH, which then causes these acetogenic bacteria to not thrive, which then causes this reduction in butyrate, which then causes this damage to the colonocytes.
Why do whoever they are, what's their justification for putting a chemical like glyphosate in the lollipops? I mean, I know why they spray
They're
it on
not doing
wheat.
it intentionally. It's accidental because they're using, they're growing these viruses on nutrients that are contaminated with glyphosate.
Oh, that's
It's
very interesting.
unintentional.
But on the other hand, my friend Dr. Mavroukakis mentioned that she went through and all of these things that people are getting allergies for, and some or other treatment, they're in them. So some of the lollipops have a legume
Right.
oil from peanuts in them.
Right,
So no
exactly.
wonder people are
I
getting
went
nut
down that.
allergies.
Yeah, I went down
Yeah,
that rabbit hole
and
myself. I remember.
yeah, and
I agree with you.
others have casein in it, which is a chemical that's found in milk. So no wonder people are all of a sudden lactose intolerant. I mean, it seems to me, at least. Okay, so it's multifactorial. How do we get out of this mess? We can start on the individual level. What can each of us do? And if people have got leaky gut like symptoms, in fact, maybe you can go through what some of the symptoms are and then say what we could do to start to rehabilitate our system.
Well, with a leaky gut, then of course you're going to get infection with pathogens in the gut, and then you're going to get the immune response, which is going to give you inflammatory bowel disease. You're going to get issues like Crohn's disease and IBD, and eventually it can lead to cancer, colon cancer, if it goes long enough. And then, of course, also just because of the leaky gut, then things that should stay in the gut don't. They get past the gut barrier, get into the circulation. And then actually toxic metabolites produced by pathogens can make their way to the brain and cause injury, cause bad problems in the brain. So you're really getting, the gut-brain axis, of course, is very strong. And what goes on in the gut is going to affect the brain badly. And so the brain becomes troubled as well. You get a lot of, you get things like depression and aggressive behaviors even, and mood problems, and also, of course, cognitive issues, all these things, autism, ADHD, all these brain problems that we're seeing, I think, are directly connected to the gut problems.
Okay, wow. And what do you suggest people do once they're in that position?
That's a tough one. Well, as far as how to stay healthy, I certainly have a program for that I advocate. And number one is to go organic. When you shop at the grocery store, look for not non-GMO, but certified organic. Look for that label. Try to buy only foods that have certified organic. And also, of course, if you can, if you have a local farmer who's producing produce and they assure you they're not using things like glyphosate, buy from the local farmer. Eat a lot of produce, avoid processed foods, don't eat any soy protein bars and things of that nature. Heavily processed foods that have lots of ingredients in it, that many of which don't look like food. They look like chemicals, right? This is the processed food industry, which I think is really just a major player in the destruction of our health, because those foods are not healthy. Independently of the glyphosate, they're not healthy.
They're not just not healthy foods, they're not food.
Right, exactly.
Right.
They're not food. Exactly. I totally agree with that. And they've taken out many of the molecules that are naturally present that are extremely important for health. Like, for example, plants. Plants have many interesting phytochemicals, polyphenols, and these kinds of things that are extremely healthy, very beneficial in ways that we don't entirely understand, but things like antioxidants. But you don't get any of those foods when you're eating something that's been, where you've taken the foods and refined them into basic sugar and sugar and starch and fats. You just sort of have these basic proteins, the basic nutrients that you think of as calories, proteins, fats, and sugars. If you have only those, you don't have a food, because the foods themselves have so many other things in them besides those that you miss out on if you eat these heavily processed foods. Those things are gone.
Yeah, well, what I say is, firstly, if it grows, you can eat it. If it doesn't grow, you shouldn't eat it. And secondly, the body's not meant to have anything inside it that it's not made of. we evolved with various toxins, and when they come into the body goes, oh, I can recognize that. Okay, I can put it over here. But when you start to synthetically create a chemical in a lab and then you ingest it, your body's going, what do I do with this?
Exactly.
I've never evolved with this. Okay, I'll just put it over here in a fat cell and leave it there,
Right.
and hope that it doesn't touch any of my organs because it might damage them. If it's synthetic chemical, microplastic, heavy metal, or a big long chain molecule, it's unrecognizable in nature. So the body just has to make its best effort to sort of store it somewhere in the tissues where it'll do the minimum amount of harm.
Right. And of course, all of the many of the pharmaceutical drugs are based on a specific poison that's actually suppressing some really critical enzyme in the body. And that's really the basis of many of those drugs. It's so ridiculous how they just look for some correlation, between, like, say, high cholesterol in the blood and heart disease. So then they say, well, if we can get the cholesterol levels down, that'll be good because high cholesterol is bad. So why don't we poison the liver? Poison the liver so we can't make cholesterol. I mean, that's like so stupid. That argument is asinine.
Yes, and obviously cholesterol is used in your brain as well. Cholesterol is used in all sorts of.
The heart needs cholesterol.
Yeah,
I think it's a cholesterol deficiency problem, actually, and I think the problem is sulfate. And I've written several papers on that. Sulfate deficiency and the inability to add sulfate to cholesterol, which is what glyphosate's causing, is causing the cholesterol to have to be stored in those lipid particles, and that's why the LDL goes up. It's very straightforward.
But the thing, Dr. Seneff, is it can cost over $1 million a day to run a medical trial. So instead of actually checking if people on the drug live longer or have a happier life, which would take ages and ages and ages, what we can just do is say, well, it lowered their blood pressure, therefore they're healthier. Well, it lowered their cholesterol. No need to check. And this is what we call like all-cause mortality. One thing that, one thing they hate to do is check all-cause mortality. So if I've got a drug that's meant to save you from having a heart attack, all I need to do is prove that it doesn't get that you can go for longer without getting a heart attack. I don't need to actually prove that you live longer. It doesn't matter if you died of cancer or of some other disease, just as long as I show that it treats the indication. That will get past the regulator. And that's really what passes for science. What passes for science in the medical field. But for some reason, those fellows over at the Skeptic Society just keep on going after acupuncturists and chiropractors,
No.
And they call themselves skeptics. You'd think maybe they'd find something constructive to do, like go after glyphosate manufacturers or these people who are selling poisons as medicines. But no, we'll just see if there's a local homeopath that we can demonstrate against or something like that. It seems like that's what makes these people happy.
Yeah, and of course they don't. It's so expensive to run these so-called, controlled, placebo-controlled trials, and they say all these people who are doing all this wonderful work with this so-called alternative medicine, they don't have the kind of funds you need to do these so-called placebo-controlled trials. And then the industry accuses them of not having evidence. That's not evidence-based because you didn't do that trial. That is so. It's such a clever way to sort of dismiss therapies that are so beneficial.
So what do you see as like in order, like the top few ways that we're getting what's the most toxic, what are the greatest threats to the integrity is like, what gets you up in the morning to fight against? And then we'll come to some solutions.
Yeah, well, basically, I think the whole basis of how the pharmaceutical industry works is extremely broken. Like you said, they just say they find some particular metric that is associated with some disease, and then they find some particular drug that will lower that metric and make it look better, and then they declare victory. We've got this great drug, take this drug, get this number down, now you're healthy. And they don't bother to, as you say, to do the proper studies to show that it actually does have long-term benefit on your health overall. It usually doesn't. I mean, I think most of these drugs that people are taking, they're wasting their money. And I think they're making, certainly statin drugs, but they have so many nasty, nasty side effects. the statin drugs, and so many people are taking them, and they think because their cholesterol's lower that they're healthier, and they're not. Because actually, that those LDL particles are important to fight off infection, for
That's right.
example. Yeah,
Yeah. And I say this as a largely plant-based person, um, lowering your cholesterol with a drug is not it's not doing the same thing as improving your diet, right? It doesn't really matter.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
That's the thing. The diet is so crucial, and of course, it is hard to know what to eat because you have all these different arguments out there for why fats are bad and why sugar is bad. So you kind of the random person gets confused when they hear all
Right,
these different messages about all these different foods that are either really good for you or really bad for you, and you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? But I think the critical thing is to get rid of the poisons, and that's why you
right,
really have to eat certified organic. The other thing I will say is that sulfur deficiency, I think, is systemic. And that's
right,
another thing I wrote about in my book, and I talk a lot about sulfur. Is very there's much less sulfur available in our foods today than there
right.
used to be.
And
And
how does one supplement that or eat specifically to get that nutritional element?
yeah, well, I eat a lot of the foods that are high in sulfur, cruciferous vegetables, like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage,
Oh, good. I eat lots of that stuff
and then
too.
onions and garlic. They're all
Mhm.
wonderful sources of sulfur. I eat lots of all of those. And then also on the animal-based side, the eggs are a good source of sulfur, and grass-fed beef and various seafoods, fish. So those are all good sources of sulfur. And I tend to eat a lot of all of them actually, and I really work on keeping my sulfur levels high. The other thing I do is I get out in the sunlight a lot without sunscreen, without
Mhm.
sunglasses, and I
Mhm.
really believe in the sunlight as a
Yeah, me
benefit
too.
to human health.
As, as well as
People
bare
avoid
feet on
it,
the ground, getting our bare feet on the ground so we make a
All right,
circulation around.
grounding. Yeah, if you live near
Oh,
the ocean, walk along the beach, which I do, regularly. Walk along the beach in the water. You get really good grounding, and that's going to provide you with a negative charge, which is going to help to keep your blood circulating well.
I think as we become so detached from nature that we think we can actually throw poisons into the environment without poisoning ourselves, it's really ridiculous. And maybe the ultimate lesson for humanity is, we're here to nurture, one another. We're here to nurture ourselves. We're here to nurture the planet. And if it means that that the farmer needs to spend a little bit more time in the fields, then so much the better, because that shouldn't be a burden. That should be like a joy to commune with nature. And if we need to pay a little bit more for our food, I know everyone's got upset because, and rightly so, because the cost of the lockdown crisis, they print money like there's no tomorrow, and now
Right.
everything's gone up in the supermarket. But historically, before and during the Industrial Revolution, the percentage of people's income that went on food, the vast majority of their money went on food. So if we need to go from spending 10, 15% of our money on food to 30% to get really, really good organic food, we're going to save money on the other end on healthcare and things like that. And also, you can't really measure the benefit of being healthy, of being able to roll around with your kids, of being able to, roll around with your partner, of being able to run for the bus without getting out of breath, of not feeling like you need to park right next to the store, feeling like if you have to take the space at the back of the parking lot and you need to walk, you're not like, oh my God, I've got all this extra weight, I need to walk. That's not what life should be like. We should
Right.
enjoy the use of our body. So, um, yeah, over to you.
Well, I totally agree. Those are all really good points to make. If we spend more money on food, we feel better. If we don't have all kinds of aches and pains. I mean, if we don't have depression, life is so much better without
Mhm.
those things. And so it's not just that you need to spend all that money on the medical treatments. You actually have a much lower quality of life when you eat
So
bad
true.
food. So it's totally worth it. And I want to give a shout out for herbs and spices, because that's another thing that I really like to use a lot of herbs and spices, fresh herbs in particular, in cooking, and you probably do too. Those are so healthy. They have a lot of these interesting complex molecules that these plants make that are so important for maintaining mitochondrial health.
Thank you so much. So, if people want to get involved in activism, if they want to find out more about you and your work, if they want to spread the word, what are their next steps from here?
Yeah, I certainly believe in grassroots, bottom up. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your family. Glyphosate is poisonous. You need to eat healthy food. Go certified organic. Get out in the sunlight. Give that message to other people as much as you can to try to promote health. And if you have the stomach for it, you can get involved in local politics. Some people have been successful in getting glyphosate banned in public places in certain towns across the country.
Amazing.
That's something you can do if you're into the political, local politics.
Is
And then, of
is
course, the government itself is really a difficult one. I know I have friends who are willing to go to the government and present the evidence to the EPA. It's a very tough and unrewarding process because they're not willing to listen, and so that can get very frustrating. But that is something that eventually could really make something happen at the top, which is what we need. We need the government to stop spending the money supporting these toxic, large agrochemical farms and have them start subsidizing the small farmer to try to encourage people, small farmers, to make a living. And then for the government to ban things like glyphosate, to get rid of it so that we can return to a healthy society. Because right now we've got a huge problem with health in America. It is crippling us, and I hate the fact that the children are so unhealthy, not just the
yeah.
autism, but so many other things that the children are suffering from in America.
Yeah, and what I say in my book is instead of spending money treating preventable diseases, why don't we spend some money preventing diseases? You, these, but you know what? What I say is, economics teaches us that a system tends to produce the kind of results that it's incentivized to produce. What we've done is what the medical industry stands to gain for is treating you for as long as possible without killing you. And
Exactly. They want to
and
keep you alive so they can make more money.
and what we seem to somehow have had is these chronic diseases that people can have for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They cost a fortune to treat, but if we got in front of it and prevented people from having these diseases in the first place, it might be as simple as bribing them. Instead of paying for a gym class, your insurance company should fine you if you don't go to the gym class. And then maybe people will get involved in their community and get healthy together and reduce their risk of heart disease, stroke, cancer, and what have you. That's maybe the world that because it's not going to work if people are just told by their doctor, okay, stop smoking, drink less, eat healthier, and take exercise. Off you go. People need to be socially engaged, and hopefully the system that we'll create will be one that helps people to participate in helping each other to participate in improving their health. We need to envisage it first, and then maybe we can put it into practice. Thank you so much for joining me on Be Yourself and Love It podcast. She is the phenomenal Dr. Stephanie Seneff. You can find her at stephanieseneff.net. Any parting words for our audience?
No, just I hope that people are believing that this glyphosate is in fact really toxic and that they need to try to avoid it every way they can. And certainly, certified organic diet, I think, is the number one thing you can do to improve your health.
Thank you so much. And you at home, be yourself, but don't just be yourself. Be yourself and love it.